I call the Honourable Marianne Street.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. It gives me great pleasure to rise to speak to the Electricity Renewable Preference Amendment Bill put up in the sponsored by my colleague Moana Maki. Mr Speaker, much and all as I admire the member who's just resumed his seat, I have not heard such an antiquated speech in a long time. We should be preparing for the future. We should be preparing for the future. We should be looking ahead. The government currently has two targets. The first is that 90% of generation will be from electricity generation will be from renewable sources by 2025. And that was a Labor government's target set when we were in government, and we're very pleased that the national government has seen fit to retain that target. The second thing they've got as a target is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2050. But it has no plan to achieve either of these targets. What we have are two targets out there in the future with no stepped plan to achieve them. Now, we agree with the 90% generation from renewable sources. Goodness knows we've got wind and marine and geothermal and hydro and hopefully more solar power coming on stream in the future. So, Mr Speaker, the opposition to this bill is based on antiquated views of how this country might sustain its energy supply in the future. What it does, and I would like to draw this to the attention particularly of the member Kanwaljit Singh Bakshi, who seem to have ignored the fact that the bill quite explicitly says that this does not include an existing plant or an electricity generation plant that is operating in accordance with a contract for reserve energy entered into by or on behalf of the Commission. So let's not hear any more of this nonsense about the lights going out. Let's not hear any more of this nonsense. It does not affect existing plants. What it does do, in fact, is to put back in place the Electricity Renewable Preference Amendment Act, which the Labor government enacted over 5 years ago. So that established a restriction on new baseload fossil-fuelled thermal electricity generation. Can I be any clearer than that? It established a restriction for 10 years on the building of new baseload fossil-fuelled thermal electricity generation plants. So it was a start to trying to wean ourselves off our fossil fuel dependence and begin to apply the kind of pressure that we need if we are ever going to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and if we are ever going to transition to a society that is not dependent on fossil fuels. Mr Speaker, I'm just astonished that members opposite cannot bring themselves to support this, because they will have to at some stage be dragged kicking and screaming into the 21st century, or into the next decade anyway of the 21st century. The future is not in fossil-fuelled electricity generation. The future is in renewable energy, and fortunately New Zealand has an abundance of all those things that other countries cry out for in order to complement or overtake their fossil fuel generation and allow themselves to move their countries and their economies on beyond fossil fuel electricity generation. This is a ban for 10 years. It is something that expires at the end of that 10 years, because at that point we will be able to assess the extent to which we have been able to move towards sustainable, renewable electricity generation. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
I call the Honourable Member Yan Jane.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to oppose the electricity renewable